There's a wooden box under his bed. Not a fancy box. Not something you'd notice if you walked into his room. It's just an old biscuit tin. Actually, the kind that used to hold shortbread at Christmas. Red with faded gold lettering. He's had it since he was 19. 22 years now. And inside it, folded in thirds the way his mother taught him to fold paper, are letters. Dozens of them. None of them have ever been sent. I found out about the box by accident. That's the only honest way to say it. I wasn't snooping. I was helping him move from his flat in Pimlico to a smaller place near Vauxhall. One of those cold January Saturdays when the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or just stay gray and miserable forever. We were carrying boxes down the stairs, and he set the biscuit tin on the kitchen counter while he went back up for another load, and the lid wasn't on properly, and I saw the edge of one letter sticking out. I didn't read it. I want to make that clear. But I saw the name on the front, and that name, just those two words in his careful, slanted handwriting, told me enough to understand that whatever was in that tin was not nothing. His name is Edmund. Ed to most people. Eddie to his mother, though she passed 6 years ago, and nobody calls him that anymore. He's 41. He works for a heritage conservation trust, something to do with maintaining the stonework on old buildings. He's the kind of man who notices when a church window is slightly crooked. The kind who will stand in front of a crumbling archway and tell you quietly everything it took to build it and everything it will take to keep it standing. He doesn't talk much about himself. I've known him 11 years. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner somewhere in Soho, sat across from each other, and spent the entire meal talking about a documentary we'd both seen about medieval bridges. We walked to the tube together, and he said same line, and I said yes, and we rode all the way to Stockwell in comfortable silence, and when I got off, he just nodded. No number exchanged. No social media. I thought I'd never see him again. 3 weeks later, he was at another dinner. Same flat, different occasion. He sat in the same chair. I sat in the same chair. We talked about the bridges again, picked up exactly where we left off. After that, it became a kind of joke between us, a standing bit that meant we were somehow friends. But here's the thing about Ed. He is the most emotionally sealed person I have ever met. Not cold. That's the wrong word entirely. He's warm in the way old stone is warm when the sun has been on it all day. You can feel it if you press your palm flat against it. But you have to be close enough to touch it, and he rarely lets anyone get that close. He never said he loved his mother while she was alive. I know because he told me, 18 months after the funeral, sitting in his kitchen with a cup of tea going cold on the table. He said it very matter-of-factly, the way he said most things. I never told her. I thought about it. I'd be on the phone with her, and I'd think, say it, Edmund, just say it. And then she'd ask about work or the weather, and the moment would pass, and I wouldn't. He said it, and then he got up and rinsed his cup, and we talked about something else. That's Ed. So when I saw the letter in the tin, the edge of it, just the name on the front, I put the lid back down carefully and said nothing. And we moved the rest of his things, and I helped him set up his bookshelf, and we had fish and chips from the place on Kennington Road, and I went home. But I kept thinking about it. 3 months later, I asked him. We were walking along the South Bank on a Sunday. One of those rare February afternoons that feels apologetic for being February. Thin sunshine, cold, but not cruel. The Thames looking almost silver. There were families out. A child was trying to fly a kite shaped like a fish. The kite wasn't cooperating. I said, "The biscuit tin." He didn't stop walking. He didn't look at me. He just said, "What about it?" Not a question. A statement. He already knew I'd seen it. "What's in it?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time. We walked past the Tate Modern, past a group of tourists taking photographs of the chimney, past a busker playing something on a violin that I couldn't quite identify. "Letters," he said, finally. "To who?" He was quiet again. Longer this time. "People I owe something to." I didn't push it. With Ed, you don't push. You wait. You keep walking. You look at the river. You give him the room he needs to decide whether he wants to keep going or whether he's already said enough. We walked all the way to Blackfriars before he spoke again. "I'm not good at saying things," he said. "In the moment, when it matters, I freeze up. I think of exactly the right thing to say approximately 3 days after I needed to say it." He paused. "So I write it down instead." "But you don't send them." "No. Why not?" He looked at the river, because by the time I've written it, the moment's gone. Sending it would just be putting a burden on someone, making them feel like they have to respond to something that's already over. I thought about that. Or it might mean something to them. Maybe, he said, but I can't risk it. I didn't understand that then. I think I understand it better now. The first letter he ever wrote, the one that started the whole tin, was to a boy named Marcus. They were 17. Ed went to a grammar school in Hertfordshire, the kind where the teachers wore gowns on certain occasions, and there's a lot of pressure, invisible but constant, about universities. Marcus arrived in their sixth form from somewhere in South London, and he was immediately, obviously different, louder, funnier. He wore his uniform slightly wrong in a way that somehow looked deliberate. He laughed at things that weren't meant to be funny, and made them funny by laughing. Ed told me all of this one evening. It took several evenings, actually told in pieces over years, the way Ed told most things that mattered to him. Marcus and Ed became friends the way boys sometimes do, thrown together by circumstance, a shared class, a project, proximity. They weren't alike at all, but they worked somehow. Marcus made Ed laugh. Ed made Marcus feel less like an outsider, or at least that's what Ed believed. In their upper sixth year, something happened. Ed never told me exactly what. Or maybe there was no single thing, just a gradual cooling, a shift. Marcus started spending time with a different group. Ed let him go without a word. Didn't fight for it. Didn't reach out. Just let the friendship dissolve the way a sugar cube dissolved in water. Quietly, completely, leaving barely a trace. Months later, Ed heard through someone that Marcus had been struggling. Not dramatically. Not a crisis anyone rallied around. Just quietly struggling, the way people do when no one is looking too closely. And Ed had thought I should call him. I should check on him. And he hadn't. And the months passed, and then it was university, and Marcus was simply gone. Ed wrote the letter 2 years later. He was 19, sitting in his room at Durham on a rainy Wednesday when his housemates were all out. He wrote it to Marcus. He wrote about the friendship, what it had meant. He wrote, and this is what he told me, not what I read. I want to be clear about that. He wrote that he was sorry for not fighting to keep it, that he'd been too afraid of looking desperate or sentimental or somehow less than what a 17-year-old boy was supposed to be. He put it in the tin. He folded it in thirds. He never sent it. Do you know where he is now? I asked once. Yes, Ed said. He's an architect. Lives in Edinburgh. Got married a few years ago. You looked him up. Of course I looked him up. You could reach out. Ed gave me a look. Patient, slightly tired. It's been 20 years. So it would just be strange. It would make him have to deal with something he's probably not thought about in years. Or it would make him glad. Ed didn't answer that. The tin grew over time. Not quickly. Ed is not a man who has dramatic fallings out or explosive endings. His losses are quieter than that. A colleague who covered for him during a difficult period and whom he never properly thanked. A woman named Priya he went on 4 dates with in his late 20s, who told him she liked him on the 4th date, and whom he responded to with something noncommittal and kind and ultimately evasive because he was afraid and who deserved better than that. His father, who died when Ed was 34, and with whom he had a relationship that was cordial and careful and never, not once, honest. There are letters to all of them. He told me about the one to his father over a long walk through Greenwich Park last autumn. We'd gone to see the observatory. Not for any particular reason, just because Ed sometimes needs to look at things that have been standing longer than any of us have been alive. The park was beautiful in that early October way, the chestnuts going amber and the air having that first cold edge that feels clean rather than brutal. He said his father had been a quiet man too. 2 quiet men in a house together, moving around each other politely for 34 years. Not unhappy, exactly, but unreached. What do you wish you'd said to him? I asked. He thought about it for a long time. We sat down on a bench near the flower garden. A squirrel was excavating something from the ground with tremendous urgency. That I knew he tried, Ed said finally. That's all. I knew he tried. He didn't know how to be what he wanted to be as a father, but he tried, and I never let him know that I saw that. He looked at the squirrel. I wrote it down, though, he said, after he died. Took me a few months to get it right. And it helped? He thought about that. Yes, he said, slowly, like he was figuring it out as he said it. Oddly, yes. I've thought about that a lot since. What it means to say something true and right into a space where no one will hear it. Whether it still counts. Whether the act of finding the words, of sitting down and being honest enough to write them, does something to a person even if the letter never travels. I think it does. I think for Ed it does. I think the tin is not a collection of failures. I think it's evidence that he felt things. That under all that quiet, under all that careful containment, something was happening. Something was registering. He just couldn't route it out through speech, through presence, through the ordinary channels. So he put it in a box, in thirds, behind a faded biscuit tin label. And he kept it under his bed. Last spring, something changed. Ed called me on a Tuesday evening, which he almost never does. He's a text person. Short, practical messages, usually about logistics. Running 10 minutes late. That pub is closed. Different one. He does not call unless something has shifted. I answered, and he said, "Are you busy this week?" I said no. He said, "I've been thinking about the tin." We met on Thursday at a small Italian place near Borough Market that he likes because it's been there for 40 years, and the owner still takes the orders himself, and nothing on the menu has ever changed. We got there early enough to get the corner table. Ed ordered the same thing he always orders. He waited until the bread arrived before he said anything substantive, which is also very him. "I've been thinking," he said, "about whether I've been doing something cowardly." I waited. All this time I've told myself the letters are, I don't know, private, for me, that they serve a purpose even unsent. He tore a piece of bread, but I've been wondering whether that's just a story I tell myself, so I don't have to be brave enough to actually send one. I said, "What made you start wondering that?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the narrow window, a couple walked past arguing cheerfully about something. "There's someone," he said. It's not romantic. Or it was briefly a long time ago. But mostly she's just someone I've thought about for a long time and never reached out to. Her name was Constance. He'd met her during a summer he spent working on a restoration project in Norfolk. He was 28. She was 26. The project was a small church outside a village called Clay, a beautiful wreck of a building being slowly brought back from the edge. A team of 6 living in a rented farmhouse for 3 months. The kind of summer that exists outside of normal time. Constance was an art historian. She'd come on as a consultant for the interior paintings, some faded medieval scenes on the nave walls that needed documenting before the main restoration work disturbed them. She spent long, slow hours in the church with a daylight lamp and a notebook. Ed spent his time on the exterior stonework. They talked in the evenings. The farmhouse had a long table in the kitchen, and everyone ate together, but gradually, naturally, Ed and Constance found themselves as the last 2 sitting after the others drifted off. They talked about the church, about what it meant that people had built something so careful and precise in a place so remote, about what drove a person to dedicate themselves to something that would outlast them. He didn't tell her what he felt. Of course he didn't. Not directly. He was aware of it, he said. He was aware of the whole summer. Actually, aware of it the way you're aware of a piece of music that you know you'll remember. He was conscious of the evenings at the long table and the walks to the beach on Sundays, and the one afternoon it rained so hard they were both stuck inside the church for 2 hours, sitting on the floor against the old pew backs, watching the water run in lines down the ancient windows. Nothing happened. He didn't say anything. At the end of the summer, they exchanged numbers in the way people do at the end of things, meaning nothing or meaning everything. And then she went back to London, and he went to a project in Yorkshire, and he never called. Why not? I asked. Because by the time I would have called, enough time had passed that it felt too late. And then more time passed. And then, he shrugged. That's how it works with me. I knew that was true. I'd watched it happen with other things. Do you know where she is now? She runs a small foundation, he said. Heritage Education. For young people in deprived areas. It's doing remarkable things. He paused. I follow it online. Not her, just the work. Of course you do. He almost smiled at that. I have a letter, he said. For her. I've rewritten it a few times over the years. It doesn't say, it's not about the summer, not really. It's about gratitude, I suppose, for a person who made me think more carefully about why I do the work I do. She said something that summer that I've thought about ever since, and I never told her. What did she say? He considered. We were talking about why we both ended up in heritage work, preservation, and she said she was very precise about this. She said the thing that interested her wasn't saving the past. It was understanding the choices people made. Every stone placed, every image painted, every decision about what to include and what to leave out. She said, someone decided. That's what I'm after. The deciding. He looked at the bread. I've thought about that constantly. For 13 years. It changed how I think about the work. It might have changed how I think about most things. He paused, and I never told her. I said, send her the letter. He looked at me. Send it, I said. Not the romantic version. Whatever version you have now. The one about gratitude. The one about what she said. That's not a burden. That's a gift. He was quiet for a long time. Then the food arrived, and we talked about other things. I should tell you something about the way Ed writes. I know this not because I've read his letters. I haven't, but because I've read the things he writes for work. Reports, assessments, the occasional piece he contributes to a heritage journal. He writes the way he speaks. Carefully, without excess, with a kind of precision that somehow doesn't feel cold. He puts things in their right order. He doesn't reach for drama. He says the thing he means, and then he stops. I imagine his letters are like that, too. I imagine the letter to Marcus says clearly and without preamble, I was your friend, and I let that end without saying anything. I should have said something. I should have tried. And I know that's 20 years ago now, and it probably means very little, but I wanted you to know that it meant something to me and that I'm sorry for the silence. I imagine the letter to Priya says, you told me something honest, and I gave you something safe. You deserved honesty back. I don't know what would have come of it, but you deserve the chance. I imagine the letter to his father, and this one I've thought about most, says something like, I knew you were trying. I want you to know I knew. I should have said it when you were alive. I'm sorry I didn't. I think about that. He puts them in thirds. He puts them in the tin. He keeps them under his bed. And for 22 years, that has been enough. It was a Thursday in early April when he texted me. I sent it. I stared at that for a moment. Then I called him. He picked up on the second ring. The Constance letter? I said, the Constance letter. Ow. Email. He paused. Her foundation has a contact page. There's a general inquiry address. I found her direct email through a conference program from last year. Ah, yes. I sent it. How long was it? Not long. 3 paragraphs. Another pause. It took me 2 weeks to get it to 3 paragraphs. What did you say? I said I hope she didn't find it strange. I said I've been thinking about something she told me once, years ago, and that it had mattered to me, and I never had the chance to say so. I said what she'd said, and I said it changed something in the way I understood my work. And I thanked her. He was quiet. That was it. How do you feel? He thought about it. It took him a while, which was right. Like I put something down, he said finally. Something I'd been carrying in a pocket for a very long time. Not a heavy thing, but present. Always there when I reached in. I didn't say anything. I don't know if she'll reply, he said. I'm not expecting it. I'm not. That's not why I sent it. I know. I just thought. It seemed wrong that she didn't know. That someone could change how you think and never be told. He paused. It seemed wrong. She replied on a Monday. He told me in the same way. He told me everything. Piece by piece, not all at once. He mentioned it on a walk. We were in Battersea Park, the tulips doing what they do in April, all that determined color against the gray sky. She replied, he said. I stopped walking. She remembered the summer, he said. The church. She said she'd thought about that project many times. She said, he paused. He was looking at the tulips. She said she'd often wondered about the people she met in that kind of work. Temporary. Intense. And then over. She said she was glad I'd written. What else? She said, and this is the part one keep thinking about. She said she'd been thinking about the past a lot lately. Her mother died in February, and she'd been in that place you get into where you think about which moments were real and which ones you only thought were. He stopped. She said the summer in Norfolk was real. His voice was very steady, the way it gets when something matters. She said the conversations at the long table were real, he said. She said she was glad to know someone else remembered them. We stood there for a minute. The park went on around us. A dog somewhere was losing its mind with joy about something. Ed, I said, yes. I think you should write more of them. The ones that can be sent. He didn't answer right away. Some of them can't, he said. I know, but some of them can. He looked at the tulips for a long time. Maybe, he said. And from Ed, that was nearly everything. Here's what I've come to understand about people like Ed. There are people in the world who feel things the ordinary way, in a moment out loud, through the face and the voice and the hands reaching toward the person who matters. And then there are people who feel on a delay, who are present for an experience, registering everything, and then have to go home and sit alone with it before they understand what happened, before they can find the words, before the thing becomes true to them in a way they can hold. Ed is the second kind. He was always going to be the second kind. I think he was born with some kind of gap between experience and expression. Not a flaw, a different architecture. The feelings arrive at exactly the same time as everyone else's. They're just processed somewhere else. Somewhere slower, quieter, more interior. The trouble is the world doesn't wait. People move on. Parents dit. Friends drift. The woman at the long table goes back to London, and the number you exchanged sits in your phone, turning into a symbol of something you didn't do. And so you write it down instead. There's a letter in the tin that Ed has never told me about directly. I know it exists because of something he said once obliquely in a way that I think he didn't realize I caught. We were watching something on television, one of those slow documentaries about wild places, the kind Ed likes, the sort where someone spends 45 minutes showing you a coastline in the Orkneys, and it's somehow completely absorbing. There is a sequence about the way storms reshape a shoreline, how what looks like destruction is sometimes just rearrangement. Ed said, very quietly, and not really to me, I should have gone. I looked at him. He realized he'd said it out loud, and gave me a brief apologetic look and said sorry. Just thinking. I'll let it go. That's what you do with Ed. But I thought about it afterward. I went through what I knew of his life, the fragments he'd shared over 11 years, and I found a gap. There was a period in his early 30s, between his late 20s and the project in Norfolk, where he almost never talked about anything personal. Not because bad things had happened, because he'd made a choice. He'd been offered a 2-year position in Portugal, something to do with the restoration of a sequence of Baroque chapels in the north of the country. Extraordinary work, the kind of thing he would have loved. He didn't go. He told me once, very briefly, that he'd turned it down because things in his personal life were complicated. He used that word, complicated, and I understood that someone existed who he was staying for, and that whatever that situation was, it had ended anyway, and he had stayed for nothing, or stayed for something that turned out differently than he'd hoped. He never told me the details. I never asked, but I suspect there's a letter in the tin that comes from that time, that tries to make sense of what he felt, that apologies, maybe not to the other person, maybe just to himself, for choosing safety over the thing he wanted, for standing at the edge of his own life and stepping back from it because it seemed too much. I hope he's kind to himself in that one. I really do. Something happened in June that I feel I have to include. I had a minor surgery. Nothing serious. The word surgery sounds dramatic, and it wasn't, but there was a recovery week where I was at home and couldn't do much, and I was frankly lower than I expected to be. It's that specific low that comes from being physically limited suddenly when you're used to being fine. The small indignities of it, the boredom, the sense of time moving wrong. It came on the third day. He texted first, "Can I come by this afternoon? I'll bring food." He brought soup from a Vietnamese place I love. He made tea without being asked. He sat in an armchair in my living room, and we watched 2 episodes of something, and then he fell asleep in the chair. He was clearly tired, probably came straight from a site visit. And I watched him sleep for a few minutes and felt very strongly grateful. Not for the soup, though the soup was good. Not for the company exactly. Just grateful that here was a person who had shown up without making it into something. No performance of concern. No questions about how I was really feeling. Just present. Soup. Chair. Falling asleep. I didn't say anything when he woke up. He blinked, looked mildly embarrassed, said sorry, and I said it was fine, and we watched another episode. When he left, he said, "I'll come again Thursday if you're still." And I said, "Yes, please," and he nodded and went. I thought about the tin that night. I thought, I wonder if there's a letter for me in there. I thought, I hope there is. Not because I need him to feel something, I know he does. I know it the way I know the old stone is warm if you press your palm flat. But I thought, I would like to read it someday. When he's ready, I would like to read whatever it is he couldn't say. Because whatever it is, I know it's true. I know it's been thought about carefully in his quiet interior, and written down in his neat slanted hand, and folded in thirds, and kept. Not discarded. Kept. There's something in that. Something I don't have quite the right words for. I want to tell you about the last conversation I had with him that really matters to this. The one that settled something in me about who he is and why the tin is not a tragedy. It was August. We were at his new flat, the one in Vauxhall, finally sorted after the chaos of the move. He got the bookshelves right. He'd bought a plant, which surprised me. Ed had always claimed not to be a plant person. A small olive tree in a terracotta pot on the windowsill. I asked about it. It was recommended, he said, as a plant that doesn't need much. Doesn't need much what? Foos. Attention. He looked at it, but apparently still needs some. You can't just ignore it completely. He paused, which seems about right. We had coffee. The afternoon light came in at that August angle, low and golden and generous, the kind of light that makes ordinary rooms look like paintings. I asked him, at some point, how many letters were in the tin now. He thought about it. 31, I think. Maybe 32. I lost count. Will you ever send more? Possibly, he said. I think so. He wrapped both hands around his mug. I've been thinking about the ones that can be sent and the ones that can't. Making a distinction. What makes one sendable versus not? Whether the person is still there to receive it, he said. Whether it gives them something or just asks them to carry something for me. He paused. Whether I'm writing it for them or for myself. And which is it, mostly? He considered this for a long time. Mostly, he said both. But the best ones are mostly for them. I thought about Constance and her reply. About the summer in Norfolk being real. About someone finding out 13 years later that a conversation at a long kitchen table had mattered. That someone had carried it forward. That's the thing you figured out, I said. Isn't it? He looked at me. The letters that work, I said, are the ones where you stop worrying about your own discomfort in sending them and just think about what the other person might need to hear. He was quiet for a moment. That took me a while, he said. 22 years. Yes. A pause. Well, better late. I don't know how to end this except honestly. I don't know if Ed will ever send the letter to Marcus. I don't know what's in the letter from his early 30s, the one about Portugal and the choice he didn't make. I don't know if there's a letter for me. I hope there is. I hope it says something that he'd be embarrassed to say out loud. That this friendship mattered. That I am one of the few people he can walk with for hours in comfortable quiet. That the 11 years of dinner tables and documentaries about bridges have been, for him, the good kind of ordinary. But even if it doesn't get sent, even if it stays in the tin until whenever, I think the letters are doing something. I think the act of writing them, sitting down and being honest enough with yourself to find the actual words, is a form of love that doesn't get talked about much. It's not the love that calls and shows up and says the thing. It's the love that stays up late, alone, trying to get the sentence right, trying to understand what you actually feel, trying to be, in private, the kind of person you couldn't manage to be in the moment. That counts. I think that counts. I think the tin under the bed is not a collection of failures. It's a record of someone trying, of someone knowing, even if he couldn't always act on it, that the people around him deserve to be seen. Ed is 41. He has an olive tree on his windowsill that needs some, but not too much fuss. He has 31 or 32 letters in a biscuit tin. He sent one of them this spring, and a woman wrote back and said the summer in Norfolk was real. He is in his quiet, sealed, careful way, still trying to figure out which words are for him and which ones are for the people who deserve to hear them. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the trying, even when it stays folded in thirds and hidden away, is what makes a person more than just the silence they leave behind. I think it knows that. I think that's why he keeps writing.